Hey everybody, it's me. I'm coming live to you from my bedroom. Trying to stay somewhat quiet, although I probably won't because you know how I am. But my kids come in here, then this ain't gonna work. So I'm hiding from them right now. Well, I'm excited to be here. It's me in the flash. As you can see, I got a little video up here. I learned how to do this, so we're gonna see if it works. I hope it does. I don't know, whatever. But here I am. I got my hat on. It's kind of cold. My hat. See my hat. And I got my beanie thing here. So sorry, it's not Corona. Relax, okay? I just had a little something in my throat. Hey, good to see you. I hope you're doing okay. I hope you're healthy. Hope everybody's feeling okay. Hope we are doing okay. We're getting with it. Let me talk to you a couple things that's going to happen in the future, starting with the one and only your grades. Look, grades aren't done till Friday. I got some things to put in, so take a deep breath, and we'll see where you are. I can tell you this: the better you are at making discussions, the more comments you're making. I'm taking note of that. Some of you were phenomenal about replying to other students. Not to mention everybody, but just a couple I saw. Talon, Eliza, you guys did a really good job. Other people did it too. So that's a key. I'm looking at that. That's going to help your grade big time, okay? Also, make sure you're watching this. Make sure you're paying attention and you're contributing. I might actually make you record yourself on one of these. I don't know. We'll see if it works or not, but I'm thinking about it. So please pay attention. I hope you like it. I'm going to try to keep it as interesting as possible. So, we're going to get started here in just a second. Sorry. So, hope y'all are doing okay. Stick with me. I lost my pen. I need my pen. I was sitting on my pen, but I found it. I got it. Yes, I'm laying in my bed. All right. God, freaking judging me. It's all good. All right, here we go. Get started. We're talking about American imperialism today. What is imperialism? What does that mean? How do we get involved in it? And we're going to try to throw these out quick. I'm going to do this one today, and probably Thursday I'm going to do one on chapter 20 on the progressive era, and then that'll jump us right into spring break, and we'll kind of chill out from there till we come back. So let's get moving here. Well, imperialism. You may have heard this word, maybe you haven't. I'm going to make sure you're very clear on it. I'm actually going to do a little example of it today. So hopefully it makes sense. But I love this picture. This picture, freaking great. Look at this dude right here. This is America's Uncle Sam. He's got a little big in the britches, hasn't he, right there? Check that out. And you could see, if you can read this, I don't know if you can, it's because he keeps bringing in all these different states, all these territories. He's getting bigger. We're expanding. I think manifest destiny a little bit. This is I think, in some ways, a leftover idea that's around. And so what we're dealing with, of course, is what is imperialism? Why do we get involved with it? And what are the pros and cons that come with it? So let's take a look at it. All right, first let's talk about the idea that we are not alone anymore. And a lot of that has to do with what happened in the Gilded Age. If you look at us being invested in foreign countries, in 1800s, not too much. Look what happens by the turn of the century. We are really involved in different movements and different businesses, different countries across the world. Of course, one of the biggest things that we're doing is we are selling our stuff, oil, steel, coal. This becomes what makes us a world power, and we become noticed because of this. I'm not saying it leads to globalism or globalization, but it's definitely like a seed. I think that's fair to say. Wouldn't you say? It's a seed. We're planting that seed right now. Okay. So another one, look at this oil, right? Look how much oil we are sending across. We're exporting, and we're importing some too, but we're exporting more than we're importing of different types of stuff, specifically oil. Now, Why does this matter? Well, look at this date, 1914 here. Now, that might not mean much to anybody, but I want to back up a little bit. One thing George Washington told us is said, be careful getting involved in Europe. You remember that? It was his farewell address. And I think that we ought to really think about that here because we're about, if you don't know this date, we're about ready to move into 1914 is World War I. And if anybody knows anything about that, we get caught into this struggle between the European powers. It's kind of a wasted war. We'll actually talk about it in a little bit. But, something to keep in mind is why did we get involved in Europe so much? And a lot of it is because we were tied in with business and commercial interests. This is happening today as well. One thing we'll look at with the stock market crash of 1929 is that it wasn't just our country affected. It was a global problem. And it's because we're starting to connect to each other today, obviously, more than we ever have. This is a map of imperialism in 1900. Now, there's a couple things I want you to pay attention to as we're watching this, okay? So to help us understand what imperialism, let's look at property and land ownership. These, if it's different color, these are all of the areas that are either an imperial country or a country imperialized. So your imperial countries are these guys right here. The rest are controlled or imperialized by these countries. A majority of course, by Europe. We dab. America doesn't, to be fair, spend a lot of energy with imperialism. A little bit, but not like Europe. Not like these European countries. Now, as you're looking down at this, one thing you ought to note, of course, is that some of these areas become more imperialized than others, right? So Africa, Asia, but Russia and China, what happened here? Well, these guys have always been independent and they always kept their door closed. They're not interested in letting anybody in there. But another one is this area right here. Why? And we're going to come back to that. Some of you should know the answer right now if you recall what we've talked about, but I'll remind you in a few minutes. So what the heck is imperialism compared to colonialism? All right, colonialism, we've been using this term, think colonists, right? Somebody comes over from a different country and colonizes. Well, you are like colonialism, imperialism, you are taking control of the politics and the economics. But the difference is that you almost want to look at imperialism as like colonialism on crack. It's much more intense. It's much more invasive. They're going to come right at you and take over everything you are as a country and strip you of your natural resources. So it's sort of dangerous. Now, there's something called a new imperialism, and this shows up in the 1800s. And this is specifically an explosion that happens in Africa and Southeast Asia. And in these areas, it is really, really ugly. In fact, so much that there'll be hardly anything left of these countries. So to help you understand colonialism and new imperialism, I actually have an orange here, okay? And I actually thought about finding a video online, somebody eating an orange, but I wanted to eat an orange today to show you that I can do things too. It's going to take me a second. I got to soften this bad boy up. So just stay with me for a second here. I hope everybody's doing okay. I hope you're staying safe. I hope you're not being like those idiots that go, sorry, I shouldn't have said that. I'm already in trouble. They went to the freaking airport to pick up the missionaries and there were like 9 million of y'all. Ooh, governor got mad. Lieutenant governor got mad, yelling at everybody. Now there's even more restrictions. Hey, and let me just say something. If you're going to go out to eat, can I just recommend that you go to local places? These are the guys that are in trouble. These are the ones you got to worry about. McDonald's, Chick-fil-A, they're going to be fine. I'm not saying you shouldn't go there, support them, but I'm just saying every once in a while, think about a local area. Okay, let's say this is a country. A good example of a country that got totally screwed and imperialized is the Congo. The Congo, and I'm going to be the Belgium here, right? Now, what we know about the Congo is in the middle of Africa is this pretty, what would seem insignificant country, right? But people find out that there is rubber in this country. Well, how do you know rubber? Where rubber come from? It's rubber synthetic. Today it is. But rubber actually comes from trees originally. And so what happened was the Belgium decided not just to colonize, not just to imperialism, but new imperialism. So what that means is you're going to first come in here and you're going to strip them, right? We're going to strip everything about their country, right? So in order to get to the rubber, we have to destroy this country, right? Here we are. We're just destroying. Oh, it's my wife's going to be mad. I'm leaking orange juice all over her freaking bed. Whatever. You know what I mean? We're just doing it. All right, so I'm taking all this off, right? Can you even see it? I don't know if you can see. See how I'm peeling this thing? I'm just peeling the heck out of it, right? You know what I mean? Like I'm imperializing this freaking orange. And then of course I got to take the rubber. That's a good orange for being out of season. It really is. I'm going to imperialize the orange here. And by me doing this, I'm taking this country, whatever makes it good, right? Because I need to get to the rubber. And so when the Belgians are done with the Congolese, this is what's left. There's nothing there. It is estimated. These numbers should seem astounding to you. It is estimated that the Belgium killed 9 million Congolese people during New Imperialism. So that's what we're talking about. It's kind of rough. Now, what's the positive, though? Is there anything positive? Well, look, the Belgian brought electricity and medicine and some positive things to these guys. So, I mean, keep that in mind. There is a pro and a con that goes on with this. By the way, I just want you to know that had we been in the classroom, I usually buy everybody an orange and make you eat an orange. So if you have an orange, you should eat an orange right now, just so you get to taste and you get to understand New Imperialism a little bit. Well, some of you are already thinking this, so let's make sure you understand it. Yeah, I mean, this is about social Darwinism, right? This idea that it's okay for us to imperialize, right? Because maybe when we do this, we can turn these people white. Well, this idea comes from somebody named Rudyard Kipling, who came up with this idea of the white man's burden. And look at this, the white man carrying the monkey to the schoolhouse to turn them white, right? You see the racism in here. But that's what we're looking at. You justify taking the Congolese, they're Africans, and you're helping them, right? You're bringing electricity roads. Some are dying, you're making money off their rubber, but you do what you got to do, right? That's the mindset of a social Darwinist and imperialist. So just kind of show you old versus new imperialism and colonialism. So, all that stuff we were talking about, the 16th, 18th century, all the establishment of a countries. New is something completely different, right? Focused on Africa and Asia, full control. Britain, Germany, France, Italy, Japan are your major imperialists, and we'll talk about that. All right, so let's talk about America. Where do we get involved imperializing different countries? Well, one of the more interesting places that we get involved with is Hawaii. Maybe you've never thought this, but now I'm going to get you thinking. You look at all 49 states, and I'm even going to, or 50. You look at all the other 49 states, including Alaska, you find commonality between them. It's very difficult to find anything that connects Hawaii to America. Like, what makes Hawaii American? And that's one of the most interesting questions when you look at this 50th state. It's a little odd man out. Well, part of it have to do with what we were looking for. So let's back up a little bit. First of all, colonialism and imperialism sometimes starts with religion. Look, you bring missionaries in, you're converting people, but you know this as well as I do. You don't just bring your religion with you when you go to these places. You bring your culture. And so what seems innocuous or harmless, this right here, could possibly look something like this. Uncle Sam coming in and writing on this. Now, it's a little unfair, but this turns into some things. Missionaries were in Hawaii as early as the 1820s, preaching Christianity, but also preaching Westernism, Americanism, okay? So, that's important to understand. Why Hawaii specifically? Because there's multiple islands, right? Why Hawaii? Well, look at its strategic value. Here it is. It's the crossroads to all of these different places. And I do want you to note this because this will play an important role when we get to World War II, if anybody knows what's going to happen. Pearl Harbor. So we'll talk about that. But yeah, I mean, this is going to be a good location. We've got our eye on Asia, and we can set our military up here, and we set our naval here. Of course, we do it for years, and that's where Japanese attack us. Of course, we'll go all into detail about World War II in a while. Okay, so in 1849, we decided to make it a territory. How do we do this? Well, we just decided to do it, right? That's what you do back then. You don't just sign papers. You say, I like this area, and we're strong, so we're going to make this a territory. England did the same thing. So did France and Japan, multiple countries. I want to introduce you to a really cool person. Her name is Lily Ukulani, and she was the queen who resisted American influence. You got to love her story. So here she is, right? She's born in the 1830s, and they sung songs of praise to her on the Hawaiian Islands. She was her hero, their hero. She was going to say them. And she was really specifically interested in helping the Hawaiians. In fact, she had a saying, this is Hawaii for the Hawaiians. Now, America's justified removing her in the name of social Darwinism, right? Think about this idea of the intellect of someone who's darker skinned. So here's the way to depict her over here. I mean, look at her eyes and everything. But here's Queen Lily, and Queen Lily was brilliant. She was a writer. She was a poet. She was a politician. She was very intelligent, but they didn't want to let the American people see this. They were showing somebody who didn't have the capability to rule, so we're going to remove her. And that's one reason why we become so caught up in Hawaii. One way we're able to get people mad at her is by putting a tax on all sugar, saying Queen Lily's the reason for this. She won't let Americans in here, so we're going to put a tax on all these farmers, and all these farmers in Hawaii get mad about this. Of course, money speaks. And by the time we get to, maybe let's see if I can get here, 1898, we take control of Hawaii as a territory. In the 1959, it becomes our 50th state. I love this picture here because this is Uncle Sam's America. Oops, go back one. Getting involved here. These are the European figures. Like, we're playing the game now. We're involved in it. You know what I mean? This is what imperialism is. Another place we're interested is Cuba. Cuba. One thing we didn't like from the beginning was that the Spanish were in Cuba. And Cuba is only 80 miles away from Florida. And to really understand how upset we are, you have to understand where our mindset is. First of all, these people, the Cubans, were being treated very horribly by someone named Valeriano Weyler. And Weyler had a reconcentration policy. And if you were against the Spanish, he would imprison you. And, you know, he was someone who in many ways, we'll show you some pictures here, just was a horrible leader on scale with some of the mass world leaders of the 20th century, killing a lot of people who didn't agree with his way. Well, why do we care so much? Well, remember, we don't like the Spaniards coming over here and settling with the Monroe Doctrine. Remember this? This is why most of Central America and South America was untouched. We didn't let them in. So keep that in mind as you're making sense of this story. Why are we getting involved in Cuba? So we can't just declare war against these guys, right? That's not cool. You have to find a reason to do that. So what we do is we take a battleship, sort of like we're flexing our muscles, and we park it outside of Havana, which is the capital of Cuba. And we say it's there to aid Americans who are stuck. Really, it's there to sort of say, you probably ought to leave. Now, we don't know what happened. This is one of the most controversial moments in all of American history. But on February 15th, 1898, a mysterious explosion sank the battleship. The boiler probably exploded, right? That's what we've come to believe. But that's not the story we want to tell, because we want the Spanish out of Cuba. So we're going to make something up here. And this is a picture of them. A couple hundred Americans die on this ship, actually. It's quite tragic. We're going to introduce something called yellow journalism or jingoism. And what it is this idea that we can control the story with the newspapers. Joseph Pulitzer, William Randolph Hearst, all these guys worked for major newspapers, New York Times. They are going to tell the American people, and they're working with the government here, that no, this wasn't just a mysterious explosion. This was the Spanish who was attacking us. So what they're going to do is sell this war to the American people. Look what Hearst says to Frederick Remington, who is a photographer. You furnish the pictures, and I'll furnish the war. Now, that seems sinister, and for those that know much about politics today, it sounds like this, doesn't it? So what you're going to do now is you're going to pause the film, and you're going to click on fake journalism, that PowerPoint slide, and there's only about, or I don't know, it might be Microsoft Word, but it's only about 6 or 7 moments in history that demonstrates that we've always sort of had fake journalism, fake news. I mean, to be fair, no one's ever told the whole truth. Nobody tells the whole truth when they're reporting on this. They're going to tell you stuff that's going to sell. And the idea that, whatever you think about the president, that, oh, this is fake news, they're coming after me. In some instances, he's absolutely right. But it's not new. That's as a historian, I'm going to say, now look, man, everybody's got this. Everybody is being sort of attacked here. Now, you could say maybe the conservatives get attacked more than the Democrats, and that's fine. There's an argument to be made in some cases like that. But one thing most important I want you to see is that stories have always been skewed to the viewer to try to get views. So take a look at that real quick for me. It's called Fake News, and click on it. It's under chapter 20 of Canvas, and then come back and let's discuss it. Okay, I hope that you were able to look at that and that you saw just exactly what was happening. I'm kind of moving my face around here a little bit so you can see me. The idea of all of those crazy different things that from the beginning 1830s with dinosaurs to people being the obituary about the Titanic, how about that one? Or about the newspaper one where the New York Times, or it might be New York Post, inadvertently accused 2 young men of being criminals when they aren't. They weren't the ones who did the Boston Marathon bombing. So, and then of course I love the fake news on the Hawaii, right? That Hawaii gets this missile sent, this message sent that missiles coming their way, and everybody's freaking out. So it happens. It happens from time to time. Okay. This is a serious problem here in America because the headlines read, remember the Maine and to hell with Spain. And we have funeral here in Havana. And of course, look at the racism. This is the Spaniards here. And so I'm going to write this down. The American people want response. They want something done about this. Now, I love the Spanish ambassador to U.S. because he says, listen, he's talking to the president. He says, you are weak, man. We didn't do anything to do with this. You're keeping the jingos or these white journalists, yellow journalists, and they're the ones controlling everything, and it's not right. But we didn't care. And McKinley gets enough pressure from the American people and from us that he approves sending troops to Cuba on August 11th in 1898, declaring war against the Spanish. 217,000 total service members will be mobilized, and we're going to war for the first time as a country since the Civil War ended. Well, a little bit here. We call the Spanish-American War. It was in 1891, and it's only about a 6-month war. It doesn't last very long. And we just sort of wipe the floor with the Spanish. There just really isn't much competition. All the fighting, the majority happened on the southern tip down here. And it is, to say the least, we have very few casualties. In fact, I'll show you the end. Battle of San Juan Hill, July 1st, 1898 will be the most famous of them. But the landing here on June 20th, and then Las Guasimos, I don't know how to say it, June 24th, 1898. So, these things happen fast, and in almost every instant, the Spanish don't have the firepower to keep up with us. And we sort of do this sandwich attack. We have a couple landing locations here, and we land here, San Diego, and then these are your 2 major ones, and then we just sort of overwhelm them. Now we have to talk about the one and only Teddy Roosevelt. Some of you have heard of this man. We'll actually cover him next time in more detail, but I wanted to tell you briefly about him, how he gets involved in this war. He is serving as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, so he's working for the President of the United States. He's an imperialist. He believes America should have the right and should spread, so he's all for this, right? He criticized President McKinley of having the backbone of a chocolate eclair. He just doesn't hold any punches back from the president. And then he resigns his position because he wants to fight. And we'll talk about why this is, but a lot of it is because he always regretted the fact that he comes from money and his dad never fought in the Civil War. So he wants to fight for the Roosevelt name. And so what he does is he gets a bunch of his friends together and they make 1,000-man regiment, which they call the Rough Riders. I'm going to write that down. And He had no luggage, very few supplies, and they just charge off to war in Spain and Cuba. And the idea is we're going to go make a name. And this is Roosevelt right here. This is him trying to make a name for himself. He wants to be a war hero. He's done so many other things in his life. This is another part of it. So here's the heel, and you can see the Spanish positions right here, and where Roosevelt and his men kind of just clamber up after him. And it's about an hour long on July 1st, 1898. So I thought I'd show you a little clip of what this initial charge looked like here up Samoa Hill. There's Teddy right there leading the way. Spanish are in white here. And again, the Spanish were unprepared for this. There's Teddy. There he is, man. It's Teddy.
They're at the top. This day is ours. You will never be forgotten.
And there's a reason why I chose this clip. First of all, it's probably a lot of bullcrap. Just to be 100% frank about Samoa Hill. Most of what we got was from Teddy Roosevelt, who tended to exaggerate on things at times. And he made it sound like he was, like this heroic thing. Truthfully, that there was an African-American regiment that had made it up on the hill before Teddy. But we're not going to talk about that. We can't talk about that, right? So let's look at military deaths here. You can see for the United States, it just is very low. A couple hundred generally. And then, of course, the Spanish have a lot more. Well, when we get done taking Cuba, we're like, well, we're not done, which may seem a little bit odd, but we're like, let's keep going. So we go to Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico territory today. We kick the Spanish out of there. We go to Guam, territory for America today. We kick them out of there. And then we go to the Philippines, which doesn't go so smoothly. So what happens in the Philippines? Well, at first, everybody write down the Philippines. At first, it actually ends up being okay. It's not that big of a deal because we work together. We have an admiral named Dewey. He's in charge of the Navy, and he's going to come in here to what's called Manila Bay on May 1st, and he's going to take out the Spanish Navy. Now, at the same time, what's supposed to happen is we actually incite a rebellion on the mainland with the Filipinos. And what we tell the Filipinos is while we're defeating the Spanish Navy right here in the homeland, Manila and so forth. We want you to kick the Spanish out. And so we introduce, so here Dewey does this. I mean, he actually so he really smashes the Spanish fleet. And they don't even really have much of a battle because they didn't have much of a navy anyways. So we come in and just destroy them. And then while we're inside, this man right here named Emilio Aguinaldo will be kicking the Spanish out. The problem was, and this is key, that Emilio and the Filipinos didn't understand that when we said kicked out the Spanish, we weren't saying you can have your independence now. What we were saying is we want this for ourselves. And I think that this is where we run into some problem because we were not clear, what it was that we were trying to do. I'll show you a clip about it.
The president had hoped the Filipinos would willingly become part of the new American empire. But the Filipinos were ready to die for the right to govern themselves. For years they had fought the Spanish. Now they were prepared to fight the Americans.
And that's the thing we didn't realize. We didn't realize that these guys really wanted their independence. We thought, the Spanish didn't treat them well, so they need somebody else to come help them. I think this idea of social Darwinism, right? They're not ready to cover themselves. They need a white person to help them. But we didn't realize that that's not what they were thinking.
They had to. In January 1899, they established the Philippine Republic. By 1900, Americans were fighting a guerrilla war 7,000 miles from home.
For the United States to maintain this empire, what the United States had to do was to use force and to project that force across thousands and thousands of miles. We had never done that. And we were now involved in civilizations, such as the Philippines, with which we had very little acquaintance. And it was a question whether or not Americans were really that good an imperialist in order to pull this off. This was an extremely brutal war that the United States and the Filipinos fought. Americans looked down on the Filipinos as people who were uncivilized. The term gook originated in the Philippine insurrection. We looked at this as essentially a superior power fighting an inferior people who deserved their inferiority because they had not been able to organize their society. They had not been able to uplift themselves, as McKinley liked to say.
Social Darwinism, right?
The United States was willing to use very brutal force in order to bring the Filipinos around. One soldier's letter, for example, relates how one of his comrades, an American soldier, had been found murdered outside this village with his stomach slit open. And the American commander immediately orders that everyone in this Filipino village be executed.
And a good thing to think about with that comparison, think Native Americans, right? Similar idea, right? Native American kills a white person, we're going to take you out. Your whole village out. Same philosophy.
This young man who wrote home,
it's an extension of Manifest Destiny.
Men, women, and children who were executed in this reprisal for the murder of this one American soldier. This was a no-holds-barred war between the Filipinos and the Americans. And by 1900, many Americans are beginning to wonder whether even all of the possible profits that this empire might offer were worth this kind of brutality.
As more and more American boys lost their lives, anti-war sentiment was growing. Many saw the war against a people seeking independence as a monstrous perversion of American ideals. Multi-millionaire industrialist Andrew Carnegie a leader of a small but important anti-imperialist movement, asked, "Is it possible that the American Republic is to be the suppressor of the Philippines' struggle for independence?" Carnegie offered to buy the Philippines for $20 million and set the island nation free.
It's pretty crazy, right? And that's a big difference between, I think, Americans, and we'll talk about this, and some other countries in Europe. We had a serious conscience, many of us, and we were like, we don't know, why are we doing this, right? This doesn't seem very American. I mean, think about this idea, the hypocrisy in some ways, right? Instead of us being the champion of people rebelling against countries, I mean, weren't we the first to be successful at it? We have now become our enemy in some ways, right? We're trying to control Philippines who don't want to be controlled. And so, there's a part of this story which is inverted, which is turned around on us. And it's kind of scary. And there are other instances where we run into this too in American history. Now, to our defense, right, maybe we were trying to help them in a way to get prosperity, to bring all these technologies, but it didn't work because they didn't believe it. They didn't want it.
All through the winter of 1900, Americans read of devastation and horror half a globe away. Time and again, they were assured that the war was all but over. But native spies reported that thousands of Philippine insurgents were plotting to rise up against American forces in Manila. That a stash of bombs and munitions were hidden in a house in the center of that city. That rebels were massing in the provinces. McKinley had been told by his generals that they could subdue their barefoot opponents with 20,000 men. Then the generals asked the president for 20,000 more. But 40,000 soldiers were not enough. By 1900, 60,000 American troops were on the ground in the Philippines. And the War Department was calling for another 2 divisions. McKinley knew that his chances in the November election could hinge on a war he didn't want to fight and didn't know how to win.
So he makes a deal with the Filipinos, and it happens in 1902, and this is how it works. Look, we will stop military occupation, but you can have a sort of a seat on the table. But it's sort of a joint occupation until we slowly grant independence to you. And that's what works until about 1913. And then it's really not until 1946, after World War II, that they get complete independence. But, it let a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, and this idea of our sphere of influence now starts to grow. And this, of course, becomes interesting because at first it's militarily and politically, but we know we're going to change this sphere of influence, aren't we? And it's going to be cultural. Think about that, right? About the cultural aspect. Okay, so in 1898, we signed this treaty with Cuba. Spain gives us Puerto Rico and Guam. Cuba's free from Spanish, and we pay $20 million for the Philippines, even though we don't really have occupation. It is very similar to like the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. A couple more things, and then we'll be done today. It's kind of a short PowerPoint today. U.S. becomes an imperial power. We're not done, right? We also play around in Latin America. We get down here and we send troops to Haiti and Dominican Republic, Panama, Costa Rica, Mexico. So, we are now, we'll talk about the Panama Canal, we are now involved. That's really what this is in multiple countries around the world. That's imperialism. Now, there was something called the Anti-Imperialist League, and they're kind of an interesting little group led by some major leaders, including William Jennings Bryan, the populist leader, Twain, Carnegie, William James, and William Jennings Bryan. William James is a famous author. And they're saying, look, this is wrong. We shouldn't do this. And so there's enough pressure that we kind of stop. We just don't want to go any further. And so we don't get in Africa. We don't get into any more of Asia, really. And I think that most people are happy with that. The question I want you to think about is, how should we compare ourselves to Europeans during this time? We don't get involved as much, but we do have some connection for sure with imperialism and controlling, but maybe do we get some sort of benefit that we didn't go as crazy as France and England and Germany and Belgium? Question mark. I don't know, right? Question I'd want you to consider. Okay, now it's your turn. So there is something I'd like you to read on Canvas. You're going to read that, and then I would like some comments. Now, if you would like to upload a video, that would be cool too. I want to see if it works. If you want to just keep with the same discussions, you can do that as well. But I would like to see you talk about 3 things, like you always have, that are key here. Be specific with me. Don't be vague. And then we'll come back and do another one. And then, this, we'll have 2 videos and 2 discussions. And once you get through that, right, we'll touch bases again after spring break. But I hope you guys are doing okay. I hope that I'm making sense to you. If you have any questions about this, let me know. Thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging in there. And I'll talk to you guys later.